What do you do when your idea jar is empty? You've looked at these pieces 1,000 times, walked this ground over and over. There's nothing new to discover, and when you try to build with them, you get more of the same. But there's a secret. Change your perspective. Tear things up a little, and you might just find a whole new solution you never thought of. Welcome back to Inheritance Machining. I'm kind of a doorknob at making gears. This is a problem because a lot of things need gears. Freehobbing was an embarrassing, demoralizing, and traumatic experience.
What is with these fucking gears, bruh?
It was also at the end of a very short list of easy ways to make gears. So I put a lot of thought into how to do this properly, without forking over several grand for a real gear hobbing machine. The best I've come up with is to turn something I already have into a gear hobbing machine. Then, long story short, I picked that one. Right now, this lathe goes inny-outy and lefty-righty, but I also need it to go uppy-downy. This is also known as a y-axis. And I don't know if you noticed it, but that's an axis right there. What if we just... Yeah, I like where this is going. I need to attach this somehow or I'm not going to have any luck cutting anything but cheese. I have this angle plate, but it feels a bit small and there's this whole nubbins thing to contend with, so that won't work. Oh, but what about these? I think we have a winner. Strong, thick, and flexible. So we have a dream, but a head in the clouds will only get you so far. We need a plan. And while it may be cloud-based, our sponsor Onshape is very much a terrestrial tool. Meaning I don't have to grow a special set of wings to use it. Or anything special at all, really. That's why Onshape is genuinely my favorite modeling software that I've ever used, and why it's the obvious answer for all my bigger projects. In fact, Onshape is the one thing that doesn't hinder my creative design process. There are never poorly timed updates, or any updates for that matter. Onshape never crashes, so progress and files are never lost, and best of all is the flexibility. When an idea strikes, being able to slap my hands on any nearby device and have access to all my work is so fancy I can hardly handle it. Throw in a bunch of other acronyms that will only make sense if you need them, and you've got yourself a killer software here. So if you're an engineer, a hobbyist, or heck, just a weirdo who wants to see what a big boy modeling software is all about, check out Onshape. The special link in my description not only gets you 6 months of the pro version for free, but also does a tremendous amount to support our channel, our projects, and side projects. With the design done, this looks like it's going to be a pretty straightforward project. There will be a plate for interfacing with the compound, a bunch of hardware for joining everything, and of course the 246 blocks, which will need some work, but that'll be easy, so I'll leave that for last and start with the biggest and most time-consuming part, the mounting plate. I said I didn't want this project to break the bank, but I still had to fork over a little dough. I just didn't have any of this fancy purple steel on hand, more commonly known as 4140. But more important than the flavor is its size. This is a little bit larger in most directions than I actually need, and way larger than I need in the last. So I get to play with a new toy. Finally having a bandsaw like this means I'm now free to do a whole lot of other things while this part takes 10 minutes to cut down the size. Like film it. What, did you think I had a cameraman in here with me? Anyway, that gets us close, so let's go to the mill. I've never used my big fly cutter on a piece of steel this large before, so this might end horribly. But I've got my safety squints on, so let's see how bad it goes. Not bad at all. Nice. I didn't really expect catastrophe. I was just worried this would end up looking like doo-doo, which for me is just as devastating. But I'm going to go ahead and say that looks just dandy. While I've got this laying here, I'll also side mill the sides, getting rid of that silly purple and more importantly, making this square. The other direction is a little wide for this vise and I just don't quite have it in me to flip the jaws around, so I'll just fly cut these instead. The cut pattern won't match the other edges, but if you're really paying attention to small details like that, I'm not making this project interesting enough. The last face is just like the first, and no, that's not slow motion. I just wised up and used a more appropriate RPM for this large of a tool, which, wouldn't you know, worked even better. Who would have guessed? Now, this is a mounting plate after all, and what do all mounting plates have in common? Say it with me, folks. Holes. We've got a couple littleish ones, a few larger than littleish ones, and one big one square in the middle-ish. I also popped some chamfers on here like a good boy, completely forgetting that I still have some milling to do, so not such a good boy. These recessed areas are for locating and aligning the 246 blocks this plate is mounted to. Squareness is kind of the whole point of making this thing after all. Yep, that'll do. But our milling work isn't done. This is a much smaller end mill, so we need to take this nice and easy. That was not nice and easy. Fortunately, I keep a decent amount of spares on hand. In the wise words of Socrates, know thyself. And thyself breaks end mills. A lot. After roughing and then taking a dimensioning pass, checking the compatibility with these holes' future mates, and putting a little extra pizzazz on them, they are feeling pretty fancy. But you know what's really fancy? A perfect fit. For some reason, I decided to use precision ground shoulder bolts for all the hardware. And now I have to justify my decision. This largest hole definitely needs to be precise though. Being the central locating feature for the compound's nubbins, we gotta get this one just right. That's one side done, but there are two sides to every coin, and this coin needs some counterbores. While using an end mill here isn't quite kosher because of the slightly angled bottom face it leaves, I decided to do this anyway for one simple reason. I don't care. A final touch with the chamfering mill and the boring head, and a chamfering bit and not the boring head, and that's a wrap. Aside from the hours I didn't show squaring this plate, this part couldn't have been simpler to make. I'm so bad at scope creep and may as well itis, so I'm really proud of myself for sticking to such a simple design. As a reward for myself, I'm going to make the hardware next, which means I get to spend some time with my beloved lathe. First up are the bolts that are going to hold the 246 blocks to the cross slide. These will thread onto the studs already sticking up out of the aforementioned. Which begs the question, wouldn't these then be considered nuts? Well, I put a lot of thought into this, and I think I've got the perfect name for these internally threaded bolts.
They're butts. Butts! That's perfect.
Alright, now that the 13-year-olds left the building, let's get to work. The material choice is whatever this is. Probably stainless considering it looks like stainless. So this could either be a lot of fun or a lot of fun. This may be a butt, but it's going to start like every other bolt, and that's by turning down the shank. I ultimately need this thing to fit through the holes will enlarge in the 246 blocks, so quite a bit to remove. With that where we want it, we can clean up the head of the butt, and then work on the butt of the butt. By that I mean tapping. Our butt. Okay, I think I'm done with this joke. While we're here, I'll go ahead and use this setup to whip up some washers. First drilling and boring, then chamfering and parting. The other side's a little rough of course, but some careful placement in the chuck with some parallels, and I've got just enough clearance for a cleanup cut, and of course, more chamfers. Do that all again and we've got ourselves a nice pair of well-washed butts. But we still need a way to drive them. It would be quite handy if I could use the same wrench I use elsewhere in this lathe, so yeah, let's just do that. Let's get our butts over to the mill. I'll pop this in the collet block and mill not one, not two, even though that would be enough, but 6 whole sides, making this a proper piece of hardware. But ain't nobody gonna like looking at a butt like that, or touching it for that matter. So one more trip to the lathe for some cleanup cuts, and of course a fondle-friendly chamfer. Now those are some butts ready for action. Aside from my posterior preoccupation, that went just as easy as the plate. Let's carry on with a few bar nuts. No clever name needed here. I like to think I'm pretty versed at lathe work, so this should be a piece of lemon squeezy. What an interesting pattern. You could almost say it looks like I don't know what I'm doing. After consulting the YouTube, I think I see what the problem is.
Who could have guessed?
Now that's an expert finish. I'm batting 1,000 today. This should be the easiest part of this project, so hopefully I got all the whoopsies out of my system. The other side is a simple cleanup pass to take this to length, then another rechamfering because I guess that's just what I'm into today. Repeat that 3 more times without a single other mistake and we can finish these out on the mill. Spotting, drilling, chamfering, and tapping. The blowout on the bottom isn't too sightly though, so flipping it over and threading it back on the tap, I can reposition it for a kiss on the underside with the chamfering bit. And that's the 4 bar nuts ready to go. Adding these to the plate and the butts, and I almost have a new lathe axis. And this is where those blocks come in. You can clearly see there's a difference between these two. One looks far newer than the other, and well, that's just a lie. These are the same age. It's just that I spent a lot of time reconditioning one a couple years ago. I took this guy from an even 2 by 4 by 6 inches to something slightly less in each direction. Now, why the devil would I go and do something like that? Well, to explain that, we have to visit an old friend. This is a surface plate, and it's flatter than a gnat's patootie. This is the most precise surface in this shop, making it the perfect place to look at the precision of other stuff in this shop. Meaning you can see this unreconditioned block is damn near perfectly flat. And more than that, the opposite faces are parallel. It would be great if I didn't actually have to do anything here, but flat and parallel are only part of the story. We need this block to also be square. Setting a 0 on one side should produce a 0 on the other, but alas it does not, meaning it's not square. Meaning this project just got a lot longer. Normally these are small numbers, but this one's so bad you can actually see it, with both your eyes and your ears. So what we have here is what I like to call a parallelohedron. I thought I was just making this up, but apparently that's actually the word for exactly what this is. I kind of already knew this was the case because, well, I fixed the other one. But I was in a rush back then, and now I'm regretting that. No way could I use both of these blocks in our lathe setup in their current state. They would start dancing all over the place and not in the fun way. We have some surface grinding to do. But of course it's not that straightforward because first I have to rob Peter to pay Paul because somewhere along the line I've robbed Paul to pay Peter. Alright, Paul's happy and ready to go. But his attractive little brother isn't. No judgment, but I'm not liking how this magnetic chuck looks. I want this in tip-top shape before grinding our block or we'll just be chasing our tails forever. I always love when I get to do this though because I'm basically using the machine to make the machine better, which is one of the things I think makes machining so cool to me. Now we're cooking with bacon grease. A light dusting on the backstop to get that trued up and we're ready for the main course. Making this already pretty square-ish block more square-er. A skim on the 2 largest faces will make sure that we're starting as parallel as possible. I went ahead and did the neighboring faces as well because, well, because. So back over at the surface plate we can get our first true reading. a 0 on one side and, well, not so bad in this direction. About 9/10,000ths of an inch difference, meaning the block is leaning this way about 4.5/10,000ths, and that's over a distance of about 3¼ inches. So how do we correct this? The simplest way is to use the block itself. It's a little trick I learned years ago that still tickles my whiskers. I'm talking about the step method. If we grind all the bottom except a little sliver on one side, that will cause the block to tilt. Get that number just right and it will stand up perfectly square. But the surface grinder is temptation incarnate for my nitpicking, so I'm going to try and take it nice and slow. One sliver required. Let's see if it was the right height. Okay, first attempt comes in at 2/10,000ths of an inch off, which means this thing is leaning 1/10,000th of an inch off vertical. Based on past experience, that's about as good as we can hope for in this shop. To eternalize this new squareness in stone, we'll put that stepped face down, grind the top, which squares it up with the two biggest faces, then flip it over once more to clean up that stepped face. From here, it's the same story for the remaining faces. First a light dusting on each end, measuring the lean, grinding the step, etch it in stone, and here's where it's different. Because that last face needs to be square in two directions, which we've gotten quite good at this point. We're within like a 10,000ths from square on all the faces. I'm going to go ahead and say that's good enough. Now I have two square blocks, which is nice, but because of all that grinding, they're two different sizes, and Papa don't like that. So the best way to make sure they're the same size is to grind them both at the same time. Of course, there was a slight sacrifice to the overall dimensions, but that's an easy fix. And now I have two beautiful square, parallel, and matching 246-ish blocks. All of my horses have been held. I've really shown my machining maturity on this one. Just one final little tiny problem. None of this hardware fits. I planned for this though. No, not that it wouldn't fit. That would be dumb. I planned all along to bore out these roughly cast holes so they're a good fit for all this fancy hardware I just made. And further than that, the holes themselves aren't even remotely straight. So one quick, easy job for the mill to clean these up and I'll be done. They're hardened. Why the fudge didn't I think of that? Of course they are. Hardening is a problem because, well, it's hard. As in really difficult to machine. Even with something as hard as carbide. If I don't figure this out, all the other stuff I already machined will have to find a new home. I guess I can just burn through inserts. Yeah, okay, let's try that. Okay, I chewed through several inserts and didn't even finish the first hole. I did eventually remember hearing somewhere that when you're hard milling like this, you're supposed to turn the speeds way down. Which helped, but only marginally. And I only have so many of these little guys. I'm gonna need another way. Come on, Brandon. Out of the box. Out of the box. What can we do? Hey, what about this? A solid carbide chamfer mill. This might be sacrilege, but I'm desperate at this point. I know I go on and on about chamfers, but not even I thought I would try chamfering my way through a part. But here I am, and it works. I was really quaking in my boots there for a minute. All of my work was about to be thwarted, but not today. Slow and steady is the name of the game. Slow and steady and a lot of coolant. I got lucky that the only tool that seems to work was able to do half the block, meaning I can do the other half by the skin of a chicken's teeth. And just when I thought, man, this thing is really holding up well, everything started to change. The tool pressure started getting harder, the cuts started taking longer, and the burning in my fingers, back, and the rest of my body got very, very loud. The end was imminent. But if nothing else, I'm a persistent man. Whether that end mill liked it or not, I made it finish the job it started. And now, we have 6 nice through holes just the size we need. Meaning there's nothing left to do but assemble. With a deceptively smooth first act, an impressive show of restraint on the second, and a harrowing, nearly fatal finale, I present to you a 3-axis lathe. X, Z, and Y. A full machining complement. And the effort we put into making everything stout and square was worth it. That ain't going nowhere I don't tell it to go. But what good is this if I can't mount something on here to machine? This tool post bar isn't going to be very useful by itself, but my fixture plate sure will be. I have an idea. And now I present milling on the lathe. The thing about perspective is you can change it at any time. A little shift here, a little bend there, and suddenly you have a whole new thing. And with that whole new thing comes increased capabilities at not necessarily increased cost. Today's project is just one step in a very long sequence of adventures to turn this lathe into a precision gear hobbing machine, which is just one long step in a long sequence of events to make a radius turner, which I'm sure will just be one step in a long sequence to make something else. But that's just life, isn't it? Everything we're doing, everywhere we are, is just one step to where we're going. And with one little change in perspective, you might be able to get there a little bit differently. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.